Okay, so today I'm going to share my screen. We have a story by Grace Paley. And but before that, we'll start with our semi-traditional beginning that I sometimes remember and sometimes don't remember. But what the heck? When the great Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov saw misfortune threatening the world, it was his custom to go into a certain part of the forest to meditate. There, he would light a fire, say a special prayer, and the miracle would be accomplished and the misfortune averted. Later, when his disciple, the celebrated Maggid of Mizrich, had occasion for the same reason to intercede with heaven, he would go to the same place in the forest and say, Master of the universe, listen, I do not know how to light the fire, but I'm still able to say the prayer. And again, the miracle would be accomplished. Still later, Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sasov, in order to save the people once more, would go into the forest and say, I do not know how to light the fire. I do not know the prayer, but I know the place, and this must be sufficient. And it was sufficient, and the miracle was accomplished. Then it fell to Rabbi Israel of Rizhin to overcome misfortune. Sitting in his armchair, his head in his hands, he spoke to God. I am unable to light the fire, and I do not know the prayer. I cannot even find the place in the forest. All I can do is tell the story. And this must be sufficient. And it was sufficient. So a story for today. There we go. I'm going to put this away. I'm going to put this away. I'm going to put this away. And here we are. Okay, can everybody see this?
Yeah. Oh.
So the story is by Grace Paley, and it's on this website, What So Proudly We Hail. So it's a very American story, as we will see. It's also a story appropriate for this season. Okay, so let's skip the intro. You can see it's about, well, anyway, here we go. Let's just go, we can come back to the questions if we want to at the end. So it's called The Loudest Voice. Who would like to read this nice and loud and clear? All right, good. Carol, go ahead.
There is a certain place where dumbwaiters boom, doors slam, dishes crash. Every window is a mother's mouth bidding the street shut up. Go skate somewhere else. Come home. My voice is the loudest. There, my own mother is still full of breathing as me and the grocer stands up to speak to her. Mrs. Abramowitz, he says, people should not be afraid of their children. Ah, Mr. Bialik. Mr. Bialik. My mother replies, if you say to her father, shh, they say, in the grave it will be quiet. From Coney Island to the cemetery, says my papa, it's the same subway, it's the same fare. I am right next to the pickle barrel. My pinky is making tiny whirlpools in the brine. I stop a moment to announce Campbell's tomato soup, Campbell's vegetable soup, Campbell's
vegetable beef soup. Come on, let's get it the right way.
Campbell's vegetable beef soup, Campbell's SC Scotch broth.
Oh dear. Why does this keep?
Be quiet, the grocer says. The labels are coming off. Please, Shirley, be a little quiet, my mother begs me. In that place, the whole street groans. Be quiet, but steals from the happy chorus of my inside self, not a tittle or a jot. There too, but just around the comer is a red brick building that has been old for many years. Every morning, the children stand before it in double lines, which must be straight. They are not insulted. They are waiting anyway. I am usually among them. I am, in fact, the first since I begin with A. One cold morning, the monitor tapped me on the shoulder. Go to room 409, Shirley Abramowitz, he said. I did as I was told. I went in a hurry up a down staircase to room 409, which contains sixth graders. I had to wait at the desk without wiggling until Mr. Hilton, their teacher, had time to speak. After 5 minutes, he said, Shirley? What? I whispered. He said, my, Shirley Abramowitz. They told me you had a particularly loud, clear voice and read with lots of expression. Could that be true? Oh, yes, I whispered. In that case, don't be silly. I might very well be your teacher someday. Speak up, speak up. Yes, I shouted. More like it, he said. Now, Shirley, can you put a ribbon in your hair or a bobby pin? It's too messy. Yes, I bawled. Now, calm down, he turned to the class. Children, not a sound. Open at page 39, read till 52. When you finish, start again. He looked me over once more. Now, Shirley, you know, I suppose that Christmas is coming. We are preparing a beautiful play. Most of the parts have been given out, but I still need a child with a strong voice, lots of stamina. Do you know what stamina is? You do? Smart kid. You know, I heard you read, The Lord is my shepherd in assembly yesterday. I was very impressed. Wonderful delivery. Mrs. Jordan, your teacher, speaks highly of you. Now listen to me, Shirley Abramowitz. If you want to take the part and be in the play, repeat after me. I swear to work harder than I ever did before. I looked to heaven and said at once, oh, I swear. I kissed my pinky and looked at God. That is an actor's life, my dear, he explained, like a soldier's, never tardy or disobedient in to his general, the director. Everything, he said, absolutely everything will depend on you. That afternoon, all over the building, children scraped and scrubbed the turkeys and the sheaves of corn off the schoolroom windows. Goodbye, Thanksgiving. The next morning, a monitor brought red paper and green paper from the office. We made new shapes and hung them on the walls and glued them to the doors. The teachers became happier and happier. Their heads were ringing like the bells of childhood. My best friend Evie was prone to evil, but she did not get a single demerit for whispering. We learned Holy Night without an error. How wonderful, said Miss Glacé, the student teacher. To think that some of you don't even speak the language. We learned Deck the Halls and Hark the Herald Angels. They weren't ashamed and we weren't embarrassed. Oh, but when my mother heard about it all, she said to my father, Misha, you don't know what's going on there. Kramer is the head of the tickets committee. Who? Asked my father. Kramer? Oh, yes, an active woman. Active has to have a reason. Listen, she said sadly, I need you to lift it up. I'm surprised to see my neighbors making tra-la-la for Christmas. My father couldn't think of what to say to that. Then he decided, you're in America, Clara. You wanted to come here. In Palestine, the Arabs would be eating you alive. Europe, you had pogroms. Argentina is full of Indians. Here you got Christmas. Some joke. Ha. Very funny, Misha. What is becoming of you? If we came to a new country a long time ago to run away from tyrants, and instead we fall into a creeping pogrom that our children learn a lot of lies. So what's the joke? Ah, Misha, your idealism is going away. So is your sense of humor. That I never had, but idealism you had a lot of. I'm the same Misha Abramovich. I didn't change an iota. Ask anyone. Only ask me, my mama. only ask me, says my mama, may she rest in peace. I got the answer. Meanwhile, the neighbors had to think of what to say too. Marty's father said, you know, he had a very important part, my boy. Mine also, said Mr. Soderfeld. Not my boy, said Mrs. Klieg. I said to him, the answer is no. When I say no, I mean no. The rabbi's wife said, it's disgusting, but no one listened to her. Under the narrow sky of God's great wisdom, she wore a strawberry blonde wig. Every day was busy and full of experience. I was right-hand man. Mr. Hilton said, how could I get along without you, Shirley? He said, your mother and your father ought to get down on their knees every night and thank God for giving them a child like you. He also said, you're absolutely a pleasure to work with, my dear, dear child. Sometimes he said, for God's sakes, what did I do with the script? Shirley, find it. Then I answered quietly, here it is, Mr. Hilton. Once in a while, when he was very tired, he would cry out, Shirley, I'm just tired of screaming at those kids. Will you tell Ira Pushkoff not to come in till Lester points to that star the second time? Then I roared, Ira Pushkoff, what's the matter with you? Dope, Mr. Hilton told you 5 times already. Don't come in till Lester points to the star the second time. Ha, Clara, my father said. What does she do till there till 6 o'clock? She can't even put the plates on the table. Christmas, said my mother coldly. Ho, ho, my father said, Christmas, what's the harm? After all, history teaches everyone. We learn from reading this as a holiday from pagan times also, candles, lights, even Hanukkah. So if you think it's a private holiday. If they think it's a private holiday, they're only ignorant, not patriotic. What belongs to history belongs to all men. You want to go back to the Middle Ages. Is it better to shave your head with a second-hand razor? Does it hurt Shirley to learn to speak up? It does not. So maybe someday she won't live between the kitchen and the shop. She's not a fool. I thank you, Papa, for your kindness. It is true about me to this day. I am foolish, but I am not a fool. That night, my father kissed me and said with great interest in my career, Shirley, tomorrow's your big day. Congrats. Save it, my mother said. Then she shut all the windows in order to prevent tonsillitis. In the morning, it snowed. On the street corner, a tree had been decorated for us by a kind city administration. In order to miss its chilly shadow, our neighbors walked 3 blocks east to buy a loaf of bread. The butcher pulled down black window shades to keep the colored lights from shining on his chickens. Oh, not me. On the way to school with both my hands, I tossed it a kiss of tolerance. Poor thing, it was a stranger in Egypt. I walked straight into the auditorium past the starring children. Go ahead, Shirley. Past the staring children. Go ahead, Shirley, said the monitors. 4 boys, big for their age, had already worked as prop men and stagehands. Mr. Hilton was very nervous. He was not even happy. Whatever he started to say ended in a sideward look of sadness. He sat slumped in the middle of the first row and asked me to help Miss Glacé. I did this, although she thought my voice too resonant and said, show off. Parents began to arrive long before we were ready. They wanted to make a good impression. From among the yards of drapes, I peeked out at the audience. I saw my embarrassed mother. Ira, Lester, and Meyer were pasted to their beads by Miss Glacé. She almost forgot to thread the star on its wire, but I reminded her. I coughed a few times to clear my throat. Miss Glacé looked around and saw that everyone was in costume and online waiting to play his part. She whispered, all right. Then Jackie Sauterfield, the previous Sauerfield? Jackie
That's what it looked like.
Sourfield. How do you pronounce it?
Sourfield. That's what
Okay.
it looked like to me.
Okay, Jackie Sourfield, the prettiest boy in the first grade, parted the curtains with his skinny elbows and in a high voice rang out, "Parents dear, we are here to make a Christmas play in time. It we give in narrative and illustrate with pantomime." He disappeared. My voice burst immediately from the wings to the great shock of Ira, Lester, and Meyer, who were waiting for it, but were surprised all the same. I remember the house where I was born. Miss Glacé yanked the curtain open, and there it was, the house, an old hayloft where Celia Cornblow lay in the straw with Cindy Lou, her favorite doll. Ira, Lester, and Meyer moved slowly from the wings toward her, sometimes pointing to a moving star and sometimes ahead to Cindy Lou. It was a long story, and it was a sad story. I carefully pronounced all the words about the lonesome childhood, while little Eddie Braunstein wandered upstage and down with his shepherd's stick and looking for sheep. I brought up lonesomeness again, and not being understood at all except by some women everybody hated. Eddie was too small for that, and Marty Groff took his place wearing his father's prayer shawl. I announced 12 friends, and half the boys in the fourth grade gathered around Marty, who stood on an orange crate while my voice harangued. Sorrowful and loud, I declaimed with love and God and man, but because of the terrible deceit of Abby Stock, we came suddenly to a famous moment. Marty, whose remembering tongue I was, waited at the foot of the cross. He stared desperately at the audience. I groaned, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" The soldiers, who were sheiks, grabbed poor Marty to pin him up to die, but he wrenched free, turned again to the audience, and spread his arms aloft to show despair and the end. I murmured at the top of my voice, "The rest is silence, but as everyone in this room, in this city, in this world knows, I shall have life eternal."
Aye.
That night, Mrs. Cornblock visited our kitchen for a glass of tea. How's the Virgin?" asked my father with a look of concern. "For a man with a daughter, you got a fresh mouth, Abramovich." "Here," said my father kindly, "have some lemon. It'll sweeten your disposition." They debated a little in Yiddish, then fell in a puddle of Russian and Polish. What I understood next was my father, who said, "Still in all, it was certainly a beautiful affair. You have to admit, introducing us to the beliefs of a different culture." "Well, yes," said Mrs. Cornblock. "The only thing, you know Charlie Turner, that cute boy in Celia's class, a couple of others, they got very small parts or no part at all. In very bad taste, it seemed to me. After all, it's their religion." "Ha!" explained my mother. "What could Mr. Hilton do? They got very small voices after all. Why should they holler? The English language they know from the beginning by heart. They're blonde like angels. You think it's so important they should get in the play? Christmas, the whole piece of goods. They own it." I listened and listened until I couldn't listen anymore. Too sleepy, I climbed out of bed and kneeled. I made a little church in my hands and said, "Hear, O Israel." Then I called out in Yiddish, "Please, good night, good night." "Shh." My father said, "Shh yourself," and slammed the door. I was happy. I fell asleep at once, and I prayed for everybody. My talking family, cousins far away, passers-by, and all the lonesome Christians. I expected to be heard. My voice was certainly the loudest.
That's the story. So
That's cute.
anybody want to chime in? Speak up loudly.
I'll say something.
Sure, Josie, go ahead.
I grew up in Connecticut, which was very waspy, and we learned all the Christmas carols, but we never did anything that really got into the religion beyond the shepherds coming to see the baby. I'm astounded that this play ends with his crucifixion and life eternal and things that really don't belong in a public school. And I like the father's attitude, though, which was, so we'll learn something about somebody else. He didn't get upset.
That's what it seems to be. Yeah. Well,
It's
first of all, she's Grace Paley, I guess, was like a generation older than you.
Yeah.
So she's talking about a reality that maybe was a little bit earlier than your experience. We certainly know that slowly, the country and its educational system has been, becoming more aware that this is not the only religion in the world, and that's not the only religion in this country, and that's obviously one of the basic themes of this story. So things are slowly beginning to be different. I was talking to a parent of one of our kids in our shul who goes to a public school, and they were very conscious of the fact that the school was not, in their view, really sensitive to the fact that not everybody's Christian. And the holiday songs are Christmas songs, and the holiday stories are Christmas stories, and it requires somebody Jewish or somebody Muslim or somebody Hindu or whatever to step up and say, hello, no, how about the rest of us? What are you taking for granted here? Even today, even in 2020. So, and this story was written some, whatever it is, more than 50 years ago. So, yeah, it's an ongoing thing. Yeah, Carol.
Rabbi, it's
Okay,
Meryl.
Meryl, then
Meryl.
Carol.
So I'm surprised that there wasn't some more pushback from the Jewish parents, because when I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, so basically everybody was Jewish. But I don't know. I don't know how, as secular as my family was, I'm not sure they would have wanted me, playing the Virgin Mary or the baby Jesus or any of those things. I think it's interesting that back then, it was just after World War II and all that, to accept the fact that the children are going to be learning more about this and participating in a way that was probably kind of fun for them. I don't know, just a little bit of a surprise to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a nice part in the story that talks about the neighborhood. Remember this part here? Hold on, let me find it. Wait. Is it before this or after this? I think it's after. Maybe it's before. Yeah, here. In the morning it snowed. On the street corner, a tree had been decorated for us by a kind city administration. Now, what do you think? What kind of tone is that exactly?
A little sarcastic, it
A
sounds.
little
to
bit,
me.
right? Yes, it's so nice that the city decided to do this. They put out some beautiful thing, a tree that's being decorated. In order to miss its chilly shadow, our neighbors walked 3 blocks east to buy a loaf of bread. So the neighbors, she's like what you're saying. This is in the time when there were neighborhoods. And this is in the time when the Irish lived in the Irish neighborhood and the Italians lived in the Italian neighborhood and the Jews lived in the Jewish neighborhood. So she's talking about the Jews. And what are they doing? They are avoiding this tree like the plague. Right? If they have to go shopping, they'll go out of their way to go a different route so that they shouldn't get see the tree. The butcher, all right, and we're talking about basically, the Jewish butcher, pulled down black window shades to keep the colored lights from shining on his chickens. Right? God forbid that the Christmas lights be in view, while he's doing his merchandise. So there is a reaction. There is a very strong reaction on a part of a lot of people that they don't want to have anything to do with this. They don't want to have any contact with this. They don't want to look at it. They don't want it to come shining into their window. So there's that part of it. But of course, we also have, the fight between the mother and the father. So if all of this opposition in certain sense is there, how did this happen? How did this actually happen in the end?
It was a Christmas miracle.
So what I think what we have here, who's telling the story?
The little girl.
The little girl.
Shirley.
Shirley. She has the loudest voice, right? And of course, she has the loudest voice in the story. She also has the voice to tell the story, right? She's the one who's telling the story years later. She has a voice. She's telling people what's what. And she is, in a certain sense, a force to be reckoned with, right? When she's famous already in the school, she's already proven she's got this booming voice, this little kid, this little Shirley Abramowitz. Whoa, you need some sound. She's the kid to do it, right? And it's part of what's playing out here. If she were a different kid, first of all, she wouldn't have been approached to take the part. And second of all, it wouldn't have been, such a done deal. Like her parents, in a certain sense, feel like they have no choice. They just have to let their daughter, be on her way, right? There are, again, all these little moments, like when at the end, when a little bit of a joke, right? I listened, and then she starts getting sleepy. She's a little girl, right? And she goes, please, good night, shh, right? She's like yelling out to everybody else, can you please stop talking so loud? I'm not and where does the father go? Shh, yourself. And he slams the kitchen door, right? But she's the boss, right? She calls the shots. And she believes that her voice will be heard even in heaven, because she's got the loudest voice of all. Yeah. Now let's look back.
Rabbi, as I was reading this, I remembered a story that my grandmother told. It was right before Christmas and school was letting out, and she was looking out the door. My grandmother was looking out the door for my mother to come home. She was probably in elementary school. And there's my mother carrying all these boxes of Christmas ornaments, followed by 5 or 6 boys carrying the Christmas tree. And my grandmother says to her, how come? She said, well, the teacher asked if anybody didn't have a Christmas tree, and I raised my hand.
Oh my God.
That's a good story.
I don't remember what my grandmother said she did with it, if she ever told us what she did. But as I was reading this, I was thinking of this, and also when having sat down with a glass of tea on my father's side of the family, he had an uncle that we called him Meshuggah Kosher, because when his daughter got married, she asked, would you eat in my home? Because she wasn't sure she was going to have a kosher home. He said, I will have a glass of tea. She kept a kosher home so her father could come and eat in her home.
Right. I'll just tell a little story before we get to Josie. I can't restrain myself. When we moved to Fort Greene, to a house in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. And Fort Greene, once upon a time, had a Jewish community. In fact, when I was in high school, I was good friends with the son of the rabbi of the shul in Fort Greene. But that was years before. By the time we moved into Fort Greene, it was a good 20 years later. And the shul had turned into a church. And we moved into this area. Fort Greene was at that time a pretty poor area, and there was a pretty lower class, a little bit of crime as well. Anyway, we lived on this broken down street, and we moved into this little house that we were able to afford, and we were cleaning it up. And down in the basement was a box of Christmas decorations, just like what Carol was saying. So this was, I don't remember when it was, but it was before Christmas. So I took the box with all the Christmas decorations, and I went out down the block, and there was a young mother who had some kids. She was an African-American woman. And I said, I forgot her name, would you like to have this box of Christmas decorations? We don't need it. We don't use it. And she looked at me and she said, why? You Jehovah's? Jews were like completely off of her radar screen completely, but she thought maybe I was a Jehovah's Witness and I didn't celebrate Christmas or something like that. So I explained to her what we were, and she very happily took the box. Yeah, Josie.
I'm reminded of my own father. In 1958, in Louisville, Kentucky, Billy Graham came to speak
Ooh.
at our high school. And a lot of the Jewish parents made a fuss and said it wasn't right in a public high school because he's an evangelist. And
Right.
my father said, but he was coming anyhow. They never canceled it. So I didn't know whether to go or not. And my father said, look, he's a famous man. He's a fine speaker. You're not going to be converted in 1 hour in the school. If you want to see somebody famous, go and listen, and you'll be okay. So I went and I listened, and he was a fabulous speaker.
Yeah, he was gifted.
Yeah.
And
A lot of the Jewish parents made a fuss because it really wasn't right in a public high school.
Right. Look, that's what I'm saying. This is when people can get away with it, or when people are not challenged and they just take it for granted, they're going to do it. So that's the way it is. And look, in the reality of the world that we live in today in America, there's plenty of people who resent not being able to do that. They don't like being pushed, to say, oh no, this is your own private thing. You can't assume that this is the way the world has to be. And they really resent it. And that's part of what, unfortunately, is dividing our country right now. About the idea that you have to make room for other people who are different than you is a very threatening and very upsetting idea for some people. Yeah, Carol.
It's very interesting because when I was in high school when, or junior high school, when they started prayer before in schools, prayer before your school started. And it was very interesting because the case that went to the Supreme Court, as I remember it, was the Herrick School District. And you know what school district I'm talking about, Rabbi. So, and it was very interesting because it was shot down by the Supreme Court. And when the first time we were in school afterwards, all the teachers were primed to watch to see if anybody started saying anything, because that's when we just got up and did a moment of silence. But some kids, of course, in high school acted up. But I'm having been in the school district where that went to the Supreme Court, I'm very much attuned to the separation of church and state.
Right. So here, that's why this story is actually on this website. And there's a paragraph, the second paragraph. Well, even the first paragraph. You want to do us the favor, read those two paragraphs that are in italics, the introductory paragraph.
Okay. Whether in the form of Christmas trees in town squares or celebrations in public schools, Christmas has occasioned many controversies over the separation of church and state. Many Americans have questioned whether public celebration of a profoundly religious holiday is compatible with a proudly pluralistic society, one that prizes freedom of worship, preventing any establishment of a civil religion. This 1959 short story by Jewish American writer Grace Paley is told in the voice of Shirley Abramowitz, a Jewish girl in the 1930s who is called upon to narrate her school's Christmas play. Why does Shirley agree to the teacher's request? How do her mother and father respond? How do you find most pervasive? Who do you find most persuasive? Can and should non-Christians take part in Christmas celebrations? Despite the children's performance of the Christmas, describe the children's performance of the Christmas play. Who plays the major roles? In this performance, a faithful representation of Christ's life. What parts are true to the biblical story and what parts depart from it? What does it suggest about the assimilation of Jews and other non-Christians into America? Similarly, what does Shirley's proud claim to have the loudest voice suggest about her place as a Jew in America?
Wow.
So just like a detail, if we go back to the description of the play itself.
Most of the lead parts were played by Jews.
Right. All of those names are, supposedly, and there's that whole part about the rabbi's wife says it's disgusting, very bad. Okay, where are we here? By the way, here's a cute moment. I love this moment. That night, Father kissed me and said with a great interest in my career, Shirley, tomorrow's your big day. Congrats.
Proud father.
Save it.
Proud father no matter what.
Save it, my mother said. Right? In other words, she's not buying this, right? Supposedly. On the other hand, then she shut all the windows to prevent tonsillitis because God forbid, tomorrow when the play has to be there, if her sweet daughter is going to have a sore throat and not be able to go on, then what? So on the one hand, she doesn't want to celebrate it. On the other hand, she's taking full precautions.
And
right?
proud. And she's proud.
Well, she doesn't want to say that. She just wants to protect.
But it's implied.
Right. So here we go. So we've got Ira and Lester and Meyer, and we've got Jackie Sauerfield, and then we've got Celia Kornblue, and we've got
Marty.
and again the trio Marty Graf, right? And all these kids, A.B. Stock, right? It's all these Jewish kids that are actually in the end the ones who are doing it, and then that's what we have at the end. What about Charlie Turner? What about him? He didn't get anything, and all that kind of stuff. So going back to that last question in that introductory paragraphs. So what does Shirley's proud claim to have the loudest voice suggest about her place as a Jew in America? What is this business about having such a loud voice? I mean, obviously, so the story wouldn't be a story if she didn't have a loud voice. But there's a point being made about that. What does it say about being a Jew in America? Anybody want to chime in?
Jews make the best singers.
There you are. So Jews make the best singers. I don't know. I've heard some pretty amazing. I've heard some pretty amazing singing by people who are not Jewish. But has everybody heard that the complaints Jews are too pushy?
Yeah, and we're loud.
And we're loud, right? And that's what this is trading on, right? That's part of what this is working around. That it's the Jews that push ahead. It's the Jews that are fearless. They have no manners. They don't know their place. And here's this Jew who's going to take over the world. She's going to out-Christianize the Christians, because she talks louder and than anybody else. That's it's a constant wonder or worry. What does it mean to be too forthcoming? What does it mean to be too assertive? And of course, other minorities in this country have had similar challenges, right? The African-American community for sure. You know, you're supposed to know your place. You're supposed to be quiet. If you're too loud, then, you know, what nerve, what kind of, overstepping, is, are you guilty of? So this is done in a fairly humorous and sweet kind of way, but it brings up some pretty bitter questions that plague our society to this very moment. And of course, if you don't have a voice, you're not going to get heard. You're not going to get listened to. You're not going to be paid attention to. So you have to speak up. So how much are you supposed to speak up? What did we say about women? Right? Women should know their place. They should be quiet. They should look pretty and be quiet. Right?
And are held to a different standard than men.
Right. And children also, right? Children should be seen and not heard. Right? Then if you're not an equal partner in the game, then just be quiet. So
Rabbi,
yeah.
when there's a problem, let us say, with the public schools not giving excused absence for Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, don't the rabbis go quietly to the school board and they try to keep it low key? They don't want to make a big stink, but they do present the case that the Jewish kids should get a day, without a penalty.
Well, so that's a question of tactics, right?
Yeah.
You have to say something, so the voice needs to be employed. You don't give up your voice, but then the question is, how do you use your voice?
Mhm.
Where is your voice going to be listened to the most? Where is your voice? Sometimes a quiet voice is louder than a loud voice. So that's a tactical question. What's the best situation in this place? Look at what's going on, this summer, for instance, with all of the demonstrations and all of the violence even that was going on in the streets of America. And a lot of it ended up causing a lot of resentment among people who consider themselves well-meaning people.
Oh, yeah.
Who they're not in favor of segregation. They're not in favor of oppressing minorities, and certainly not the African American people. But
It gets fired.
it went too far, right? And then if you talk to some people in that community, as I have, they go, "We've been quiet for years. We've been quiet for generations. That didn't get us anywhere. Why are you paying attention to us right now, if not for the fact that we're yelling and screaming?" Right? If George Floyd was murdered and nobody said a word, would the entire country have decided that this was a tragedy that should never happen? Well, guess what? It's been happening for hundreds of years. So when do you end up having to really yell and scream? It's a good question. There's a bitter joke, bitter joke, Jewish classic joke. Two Jews are being brought out to be shot by the government because they're Jews, right? And they're brought out and they're lined up against the wall, and one of them starts going, "You bastards, you such and such as," and the other one says, points him, pokes him in the ribs and says, "Quiet. What do you want? You want to get them angry at us?" Right? So that's the joke, right? Sometimes you can internalize that caution. They're about to shoot you, but you don't want to get them too angry, right? Don't raise your voice. And then on the other hand, the ones that are saying, "Oh, those Jews, they're so uncouth. They're so so loud," or like I said, those blacks, or whoever it is that why are some people suggest, why are the Asian groups more acceptable? Because they don't make a lot of noise. They just go about whatever it is that's going on, They don't rock the boat. They don't make the noise. So that's part of what this is. This story is saying. Okay. Anybody else have any other comments?
Yeah, wait a second. Yeah, it's Meryl again.
So Meryl,
know,
do you have the story in front of you?
I do, yes.
Good. I can't tell what you
Oh,
have.
yeah, no, it's on my screen, the same
Good,
as
good.
everybody else.
Right,
So,
good.
I always think about things a little differently than everybody else. So my question is, do you think that the teacher who handed out the assignments was purposely giving the Jews these big parts, hoping that in a way they would feel attracted to the story of Christ and being part of this big holiday that most other people celebrate and anything? Is there some sort of a possibly subversive thing going on there?
What do people think?
It's possible that, you need to dig into somebody's mind, and it could be just pure straightforward up front. He needed the best people to do it, or there was an underlying, you could read it either way. It's an interesting take.
Or you could say that he was choosing them because he wanted them to feel accepted.
Mm.
Right. So, but acceptance only takes the form in this situation of, we accept you as long as you're like us. Right. As long as you go along with what we want, then we certainly will accept you. There was a debate in France when they were struggling with the question of whether the Jews should be accepted as full citizens, full French citizens. And one person whose name I forget now said, to the Jew as an individual, everything. To the Jews as a people, nothing. That was his sort of compromise, right? I'm going to give you your individual rights, but I'm not going to give you rights to be identifiable as a separate kind of group or something like that.
The French still are. It's still that way. That's how the French are. It's still that way.
That's right. They have this idea of laissez take.
Coat,
right.
You can't wear a burqa. You can't.
Right. But unfortunately, that's also, for instance, what's going on in Israel today, where the right wing says, well, we'll let the Arabs have individual rights. We're just not going to let them have rights as a people. What's wrong with that? That's good. They don't see that there's any possible problem with that. Of course, when the shoe was on the other foot, it was called anti-Semitism. And Jews did try to fit in. You had a famous saying that was attributed to Moses Mendelssohn: be a Jew in your home and be a human being on the street. Right? Don't be distinguished outside. Nobody should be able to tell what you really are. And this is, of course, a very Protestant idea that religion is a matter of private, individual, belief in your heart. But that's not really the way religion has worked for the thousands and tens of thousands of years that human beings have had their various religions. Religions have been a very much of an identifiable marker of groups of people and of ways of life. So this is part of the struggle. How do you deal with it? So if it means being open to everybody, great. But if it means, well, let's assume quietly that the majority culture is the majority culture and that's all there is to it, just suck it up. That's a very human approach, but doesn't let people raise their voice. Yeah.
I heard a nice or read a nice story, Miss Merrill again, on I think it was probably on Facebook, a little news report. That reminded me of the story about some Jewish people in some small Midwest town where there weren't too many Jews and they wanted to light a menorah, and then the the skinheads or whoever,
Right.
the anti-Semites.
Billings, Montana.
Yeah, that said, we're gonna come, trash your home. So everybody in the neighborhood put a menorah in there.
Supposedly everybody in the whole town.
Yeah, so that was very nice. But there's a contemporary analog to that. A Black family moved into it must have been a primarily or all white neighborhood, and these things you put on your lawn during holidays. It could be a pumpkin for Thanksgiving, or a turkey for a pumpkin for Halloween. And they have Santa Claus, and they fill up with air, and they kind of bob around in the wind. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, there's actually around the corner from us, there's one of these things also with the pump up one, except it pumps and then it goes down. And they made the way they made it. They made Santa, when the air gets pumped up, he's coming out of a chimney.
Oh, cute.
And then when the air goes down, he sinks back down into the chimney. It's pretty cute.
So this Black family got one of those things, and it was a Black Santa. So a lot of people in town, sort of started forming groups on their lawn and take that down. That has no place.
Oh my God.
And this, and worse, if you can imagine, just worse things being said. So all the neighbors went out and bought Black Santas to put on their lawns so that these people wouldn't stand out.
Right.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
Yeah, especially for the company that sells the Black Santas.
True, very true.
Nice.
It's a Jewish company.
Right. Right. No, that is nice. It's remarkable how small-minded people actually can be. It's pretty amazing. So
it's a nice thing to hear. It's a nice thing to hear that people will stand up for their beliefs when somebody is being maligned or things like that. That people will stand up, and that's what makes me feel good. Gives you a good feeling.
Right.
It's all just a hair's breadth away from. Getting back to I didn't read the story because I came late, but surmising.
Here, hurry up. Here it is.
I did try to read it a little bit.
It's online. That's
I found it. I couldn't read it all before talking.
It's a sweet story.
The every year in Montclair schools, for a number of years, the kids, did the music program, and they always did. There were Christmas songs, Hanukkah songs, Kwanzaa songs, and then if it was the appropriate time of year, there was Eid, or there might be other, Islamic-based things. But they seem to choose them to be not so religious a song, right? You're not singing about Jesus or whatever. But there were cultural songs. But I thought it was very sweet. It always was very sweet to see the kids singing all these different cultural songs. It made me happy, actually.
So I think you're right. But that's what it's all about. It's the context of, is the effort to be inclusive, or is it clueless and really just assuming that our way is the way for everybody, right? So I mentioned before you came on that a parent at Shomrei was complaining. It wasn't the Montclair school district. I won't say which one, but one of our neighboring school districts, where they felt that and their child noticed that there wasn't that kind of sensitivity, and that it was really a very, very biased choice of what kind of stuff was going to be in the program.
Right.
So we still got work to do.
Rabbi, it's interesting that at the Nutley Temple we had a preschool, and over the years we were in a Jewish preschool because to keep it going, there were Asians and there was a mixture, and the head of the preschool was very careful when it came to the end of the year. There was no Christmas, there was no Hanukkah, there were snowmen. They celebrated winter. She was very, very careful about that. So and this goes back 1980s, 1990s, because we closed in 94. So she was very attuned and very careful not to bring Christmas in, of course, but not to delve into Hanukkah.
Right. And
walked a fine line.
Right. So that's the fine line that she walked. And, we've said already, the people that can appreciate that, great. The people that say, hey, if you're not including my thing, then you're discriminating against me and you're not giving me my religious liberty, my religious freedom, that becomes a cause of resentment. So we still have it. We still have an ongoing, very relevant question. All right, I'm going to close us down here. I'm going to stop the
Thank you,
sharing
Rabbi.
and see you next week. I'm going to stop the recording.